The doors have closed. The performance shall begin. My name's John Gravio. I come from Newcastle or Milne. I'll be your moderator for today. We've got a wonderful set of panellists here. They're all wonderful people. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the traditional Noongar people, and we welcome their elders, both past, present, and those yet to be, to these proceedings today. I have some housekeeping, but I think I might do the housekeeping at the end of the session. The first presentation that we're going to have is on the Noongarpedia project, and we have three presenters. Professor John Hartley, AM, is a researcher at the Centre for Culture and Technology at Curtin University. His current research focuses on open knowledge and the role of users in creative industries and networked economies, including Indigenous uses of internet affordances and social media. A pioneer of media studies, he has published over 30 books on popular media and culture. His book, The Indigenous Public Sphere, was published by Oxford University Press. His colleague is Dr. Zhang, is a research assistant for the Noongarpedia project at the School of Media, Creative Arts and Social Inquiry, Curtin University. She has a PhD in Media Studies from Curtin University. Her research focuses on how non-specialists take up of digital technology, especially new media technologies, constitutes the practice of cultural citizenship in the digital age. She has carried out studies to reveal opportunities for having a voice that participatory media practices provide to migrants and people with disabilities. And the third member of the team that's here is Gideon, who also speaks some of the Noongar language. Would you like to do some Noongar for us? Gideon is from Wikimedia, and I don't know your last name? Digby. Gideon Digby.
Kaya. Kaya wanju Noongarpedia. Kaya wanju nala Noongarpedia. Both of those are welcome to Noongar country, and welcome to our Noongarpedia. We also pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge that we are on Noongar land.
Thank you, Gideon. If you'd like to make them welcome.
Hi, I'm John Hartley, and I present the apologies of Len Collard in particular, who was intending to be our lead speaker and is detained in Albany. I'm not quite sure why, but there he is. And also Kim Scott, who's a writer in Western Australia. Some of you may have heard of him. He's an investigator on this project, and he's overseas at the moment. Plus, we've got a team of research assistants and partners in the community who have been working with us over the last 2 or 3 years, some of whom you can see pictures of there, just to indicate that this is quite a large project, and it's one that has involved both Noongar and non-Noongar people and Noongar and non-Noongar speakers as part of what we're trying to achieve. So I will kick off with the project description, as it were, and some of the work that has a particular reference to archival issues will be, as it were, homed in on by Zhang when it comes to be her turn. And meantime, Gideon, who's been working with us in workshops and in other contexts to take this whole project forward, has some, as it were, detailed understanding of the process by which the actual Noongarpedia itself is being developed. But before I start, there's something I want to say, if I can find it. Today, this day, there was a news item in the press, and it read as follows. The Governor has declared an emergency for native languages, aiming to promote and preserve all 20 recognised Indigenous languages in the state. The order signed this week directs the State Education Commissioner to work with partners to promote Indigenous languages in public education and elsewhere. The order also directs the state to use traditional native place names on public signage. The order instructs state commissioners to designate a tribal liaison tasked with producing a plan to boost collaboration with native partners. The Governor's order was prompted by a report this year by the Native Language Preservation and Advisory Council, warning that the languages could become extinct by the century's end. Now that is true, not fake news, but it's not the state of Western Australia. It's the state of Alaska. And I want to report that this is a newsworthy and relatively neutral item in American regional media because I think the public understanding and media representation of native languages, indigenous languages in Australia, is frankly woeful. And the understanding of it at the policy level is worse. So there is a long way for Australia to go before it is able to accommodate itself to the existence of the endangered, as it were, or threatened languages, which are particularly those that are spoken in the more populated parts, southern parts of the continent, as opposed to the less populated northern parts of the continent. So the first thing is about how the status of the languages is in a less advantageous position than it is in other countries. The second thing is that this isn't really a talk about archives. What we're not interested in is preserving the language in an archive in order to stop it going extinct. That is important work, and there are Noongar language organizations that are devoted to that task, and it will take presumably some time, decades perhaps, to accomplish. But at the same time, we're interested in the use of the language and in its everyday, future-facing relationships with the lives that people live in the Noongar community and beyond it. So this project is not about archiving the language, it's about using the language and the use of the language in some archived form, such that it becomes a living part of everyday life for Noongar and non-Noongar people. And this is where Wikipedia comes in, because Wikipedia, as you will know, is a very popular website. I don't know if it's still the 5th most popular in the world, but certainly has had that status for a long time. And it was founded by a couple of guys, not those two people there, but one of them, Jimmy Wales, who said in 2005 that Wikipedia is an effort to create an encyclopedia, a free encyclopedia of high quality to every single person on the planet in their own language. That was his ambition in 2005, and we take it seriously. We think that maybe we should see whether that's possible in the very opposite of the great lingua franca of contemporary times, which is English, in a language that's spoken by few people and is in an unarchived condition. So this is the challenge for Wikipedia as well as for Noongar, how to use the affordances of contemporary digital media for the purposes of using, developing, and, if possible, preserving what is regarded as an endangered language. So our research question for which we receive funding from the Australian Research Council was this: why is there no Noongar Wikipedia? And in fact, when we started looking at the relationship between indigenous languages in Australia and Wikipedia, we found that there are none. There are no indigenous language versions of Wikipedia in Australia. There weren't then in 2014 when we started, and we think there are not now. So it's an interesting difference between Australia and other countries, that this affordance of global encyclopedic development has been neglected by all of the indigenous languages. So we wanted to ask what the reasons were for that. Is it because those languages are archived in oral form rather than as textual resources? Is it because all the people who speak Noongar also speak other languages, especially English? And in that case, where does the Noongar language stop? What would you identify as Noongar and what would you identify as English in that context? What's the relationship between Noongar and Aboriginal between Noongar and non-Aboriginal users? This is an interesting question. If we develop a Noongar version of Wikipedia that is largely used as a resource by people who are not Noongar, then what good is that for the Noongar language and the Noongar people themselves and for their culture and their future? So there's a question there about who is it for? There's a question that belongs to traditional Noongar culture, which is the restricted nature of certain kinds of knowledge, restricted by gender, by district, by age group, and by usage. And all those protocols need to be respected and certainly understood before it's possible for knowledge to be shared. And then there's the tricky question that's more a question for people like me than it is for users of Noongar, which is relations among media. There are so many places where you might find Noongar. You might find it on Facebook, you might find it on Instagram, you might find it in Wikipedia, although probably less so. There are places where it's being used, but not necessarily easily drawn together as an archive of the language. The other issue that is facing the language is perhaps more a human problem, which is that it simply hasn't been a priority for language activists or for Noongar leaders in this environment that we live in today to spend time thinking about Wikipedia. It hasn't been led by any government agency or community-based agency or commercial agency. We have no philanthropic assistance to keep us going. So there is a question about how much investment is being made in the opportunities for the language afforded by digital media. And so, as a result, Australia lags very far behind other countries in the development of minority language or sub-national language Wikipedia versions. I come from Wales, one of the places where there is an indigenous language, Welsh, which has a very strong tradition of activism in relation to the Welsh language, as opposed to simply the English that most people in Wales speak. And this year, in March, the Welsh language Wikipedia passed the milestone of 100,000 articles. So it's a very good example, and one of many. Broadcasting is another. There are other forums for the Welsh language to be promoted, and there are activists wanting to promote it in those forums who've been active for generations. So there's a long history of language politics in Wales, which results in achievements like that. Maori has a Wikipedia in the Maori language, which has its ups and downs. I'm not an expert on it, but if anyone here is willing to talk about it, then we would certainly be interested. One that did catch my eye was Armenian. Armenia is a country where the president announced a few years ago that his policy was one Armenian, one article. His idea was that every citizen of Armenia should write one article for the Armenian language Wikipedia, and then there would be an Armenian language Wikipedia. What a great idea. Let's do it. At the other end of the other extreme, there is a notorious person called Sverker Johansson. You know about Sverker? Everybody knows about Sverker. He's the most prolific author on the planet. He has authored 2.7 million, or had in 2014, I haven't found up-to-date figures, authored 2.7 million articles on Wikipedia using a bot. And at that time, he was responsible for 8.7% of Wikipedia content and half of the Swedish language Wikipedia. So there's different ways that you can make Wikipedia using technical affordances, and there's different uptake in different countries depending on how they prioritize their language and their technologies. But, as I've pointed out, we have no Australian indigenous language Wikipedia versions at all, and yet Australia has some of the most diverse and continuing indigenous languages in the planet, including some quite large language groups up north. So there's a question about why the affordances of digital culture and the traditions of indigenous culture have not been able to come together. So we want to experiment with how that might work, and we set up the Noongarpedia back in 2014, and we're using it as a kind of experimental sandpit to explore these issues that I've been discussing so far, and in the process to indicate the way in which what are thought of as regional languages, even tribal languages, in places like Australia, intersect with global affordances, digital media and connectivity across the world, such that all languages, no matter how small, are connected with global communicative opportunities of various kinds. And an example of how important that is, that all languages are global languages, all languages are open to the world, where people who are not in the same country can nevertheless have input into or make use of the use of that language in something like Wikipedia. Is an example I use comes from Wales, where it took 400 years to get from the idea that you would translate something important into Welsh, in this case the Bible, which was translated into Welsh in 1588. But it wasn't until 2009 that the first globe in Welsh was created, and it's actually just a blow-up ball for school use. But nevertheless, it is a globe understood as the world, and it is in Welsh. So the idea that knowledge that is understood as regional, local, and minority is nevertheless of global extent or of global interest is a new idea that we have to start thinking about. Okay, Gideon.
When we started with the Noongarpedia project and started working, what we did was we looked around to skill up Noongar people to actually write the content and create it. Now, what we found was that we started by working with university students. These guys have got the research skills, the knowledge, the keyboard literacy, everything else. But the thing we found was that university students have too much on their plate. We still do work with university students. What we found was that taking it back to primary school level of students, we actually got a better connection with the students, and we created that connection between the young people and their elders. So the kids would come to school, learn about it. They would be keen and engaged and want to know more, and we kept feeding that part of it. They would do songs and write articles and stuff and learn how to do that. But what they were all doing was, at the end of the day, they were going home and they were seeking out their elders because they wanted to learn more. And we were engaging the Noongar students in the schools where we were doing the work. Now, this project up behind us, the community development one, was done through Murdoch University, and it was about working with community development people when they were studying, so they could get an understanding of the Noongar languages and the issues surrounding cultural sensitivities. And it's something you run into with all your archives. Who do we speak to? Who do we look to? Where do we find the information we need? How do we share it? Is it appropriate to share it? All of those questions are exactly the same as what you face with your archives. How do you let the information out? When should you? When shouldn't you? What should be the protocols behind it? Who should be able to access it? Who does it speak for? Because most of our records are written by people like Daisy Bates and George Moore and Bussell and Baldwin and Don Salvato, and in reality all they're doing is they're repeating the words of someone else. They were repeating what some other person, and it's that importance that makes the information and connects it back to country. You'll see this one here is Noongarpedia. That is Noongarpedia, sorry. That is a piece of swamp near Perth Airport. And what we found was that one of the students, this university student, she was actually working with a group associated with the airport, and she wanted to write about something they were looking at, and she found that a lot of the records she had access to were records within Indigenous Affairs departments, in archives and stuff, and her biggest question was, what was appropriate to share? What can I use? Because the nature of the location really restricted the information and who could share that kind of knowledge, because there is differences culturally as to whether it's appropriate for a male or a female, for a child, for certain adults to enter an area without permission or to gain knowledge without the permission. We found the same thing when we went down to Albany. It was all about who has the permission, who has the authority to speak for this place, and can that information be shared? And at the same time, when you're talking about physical places, do you want to share it? Do you want to damage it? Do you want to put it out there where someone can come along and make changes or impact the site negatively? Now I'll hand over to Jan to finish off.
So I will specifically focus on the knowledge source for Noongarpedia. I will specifically take on the example of the Warlonging project. So my name is Zhang. I'm a research assistant for the Noongarpedia project based at Curtin University. So the Warlonging Noongar Language and Stories project is a separate project from Noongarpedia. It was started by Professor Kim Scott in very close collaboration with the Noongar community in Albany, especially members from the Warlonging family. That's why the name is Warlonging. So the project, as well as it's actually also a incorporated organization. It has its AGM and committee. So this project organizes activities, including workshops for painting, trips to Albany, to the country in Albany, and also like book launches and exhibitions of painting. With the local community in order to enhance and promote the Noongar cultural heritage. Amid these activities, we collect resources, materials such as interview footages and photos of the activities, and we edit them into, and make them into language and story resources and publish them online. Then we put them, we feed these information and resources into Noongarpedia. So the project actually, in relation to Noongarpedia, plays a role as a knowledge source. But this role is quite special because it has two sides. On one hand, it aims to reclaim the cultural heritage and by putting together different resources and to maximize the control of cultural heritage by the Noongar people themselves. So it serves as a database, as a pool of resources for Noongarpedia. At the same time, it also serves as a protocol setter because it emphasizes appropriate sharing, appropriate access, following the cultural protocols for the Noongar community, so that it finally return and consolidate the cultural heritage back to the community itself. So as a database, of course, it put together different data types, both written, such as Noongar words, spelled out, in print, storybooks with illustrations, which Professor Kim Scott co-authors with Noongar community members and with illustrations, and also interview footages, audio recordings, activity photos, paintings, etc. And we have already provided some links and photos and information, like, for example, the meaning of kuding, a kind of bush food, on Wikipedia. So we also feed our information of stories, books written by Noongar people in Wikipedia. So as a database, it has different aspects to deal with. First, we don't intend to extract information or extract meanings of language from Noongar people as a start. We actually just record our conversations on the memories of places with Noongar people. And then we find the bits and pieces of language and stories in these footages and then extract them, make them, tidy them up and make them more accessible, more clear for the wider public to know about. I know my okay, I know my time is limited. So, for example, we extract the footage in which Noongar people tell us about bush food.
That's a tick. That's a tick. That's emu like that there, see? That's a tick. That's what they call a wild cherries.
So it's in conversational language, very easy to understand, and it's not, it's not like a dictionary. Sometimes they tell the stories behind this language, this word. So it also emphasizes that we need to follow the cultural protocol in sharing. So we have tried a couple of things like putting advice on content on the homepage, saying there are images of deceased members of the community. So please don't use them in ways that will cause distress for their families. And also we use Creative Commons license to prevent unintended use, claim the ownership of these videos. We also set password to the footages which the families only want to circulate the footages within themselves rather than showing to the public. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.